how can you optimize something if you don't know how it works? Like your mindset, like your emotional makeup. If you don't know that, it's very difficult. You just look around, you try to copy people, you do your best, but maybe that's not enough.
Welcome to the EQ Gangster podcast, where you will learn practical tools to grow your mental and emotional health and intelligence to be the best version of yourself, both at work and at home. It is real, raw, and transformational. The journey of emotional growth isn't easy, but it's worth it. I believe in you. This episode is sponsored by Classical Conversations. Since 1997, Classical Conversations has been equipping families like yours with the resources to homeschool with confidence, following a classical curriculum rooted in a Christ-centered worldview alongside other families in a local community. Homeschooling is doable with Classical Conversations. Check out classicalconversations.com/Gibbons for more information. Again, that's classicalconversations.com/Gibbons, Gibbens.
Chahbah!
Long time no see. How are you?
How are you, brother?
Unbearable, feeling the pain of not seeing you. Just not right.
Bro, that is good, man. That is good. I love it.
What's going on with you?
I dig it like a shovel. Man, I'm doing great, Csaba. Well, okay, hold on. So I want to give you a real answer. So there's parts where I'm doing amazing, and there's other parts where I am working through some challenges and navigating the, trying to be as productive as possible through the leadership and emotional challenges that I'm working through. But it's also, I enjoy that stuff also. So, but overall doing amazing, bro. Thank you for asking. How about you? What's going on with you?
But no, it's so refreshing to get a real answer, not this, everything is shiny and beautiful and blah, blah, blah.
Right, that's right. Yeah. No, definitely not everything is rainbows and unicorns and Skittle farts. I definitely have some challenges I'm working through.
That's a good sign.
I think that's part of the journey, though, right?
I think so.
How about you? How have you been?
Working a lot. I was in Hungary for 3 weeks, working in Germany for a week. That was less exciting. Otherwise, yeah, there's a lot to do. Not everything is exciting, but when you're an entrepreneur, then you choose your pain, and that's the not too glamorous side of being an entrepreneur.
Yes, that's exactly right. That's awesome. Okay, so Csaba is a British-Hungarian entrepreneur, author, speaker, and executive coach based in the UK. He's the founder of ICQ Global, a people development organization with over 200 licensed partners in 45 countries. Csaba is the developer of the multi-award-winning Global Disc and Growth Zone models and the best-selling author of the Uncommon Sense in Unusual Times hybrid book published with Marshall Goldsmith. Csaba has 15 years of experience in setting up startups, working with Fortune 500 companies, government agencies, entrepreneurs, and certifying over 100 coaches and consultants globally. And I just discovered that not only can he coach you for your business and your life, but he can also beat you up, as his background in Japanese jiu-jitsu and some Muay Thai kickboxing. He's just an all-around bad to the bone dude. Csaba, it's great to have you, brother.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Yes, absolutely. So Csaba, how did you get in this space that you're in now?
I think sometimes people are expecting a big, inspiring story that I wanted to make the world a better place. It's just not true. I fell on my face, I hurt myself, and I wanted to understand what went wrong. When I started my first company, I managed to scale it up onto a national level. And then I lost it because I thought that it was enough to have common sense, good intentions, qualifications. And it turned out it's just not true.
Okay, so what led you into being an entrepreneur? Let's go from that point.
Every time I do a psychometric assessment, then somehow it comes up that I've got a lust for freedom. And I think often that's one of the reasons why you want to be an entrepreneur. It's not easier, it's different, but you choose your pain. And I always found it difficult to listen to people who were, at least to me, not better than me in a certain role, but they expected me to obey. I said, I don't really like that. And probably that's how it started. And I thought I could do better. So let's try to find it, because complaining about something is not enough. But if you put the work into it and you can create something better, then I think you deserve it.
So that first company that you took to a national level and then fell on your face, what was that space? What was that business?
One night I was reading a book. It's called The Dragon's Den. I think in the US it's called the Shark Tank. You know, when you're the millionaires and you pitch your idea. And then somehow I had this idea that I wanted to eat mussels, seafood. Where can I have it? And I came up with an idea. How come you cannot look for restaurants based on the menu items? So for example, what if I want to eat a steak? Then I could enter a steak and I get all the results and I could compare the value. Value might be the quality, the location, or the price. You know, it's subjective. You click on it, you go to the menu, you read about the restaurant, you get to know the concept behind it, the owner, why they started it, because I thought a restaurant should be proud of who they are and what they stand for. So I created a restaurant booking site called proudrestaurants.com. And that was the idea behind it. In theory, that sounds really good. In reality, it wasn't. Because if the menu is not up to date, then you just piss off people. Because based on that, they go to restaurants, and if it's out of date, they're going to be really angry. And angry people are very talkative. So we had to pivot, and then it turned into a booking site, or the booking site and promotional site. And then we had a partnership with a software company. So it became a joint venture. And then after that, we signed some strategic deals as well. And technically, we started with 35 restaurants here in Brighton. And in 1 year, we had 5,500 all over the UK. It became the fastest growing and biggest restaurant listing. And on paper, everything made sense. In real life, not so much. I just couldn't work with the other CEO. He was French. I'm not saying that was the problem, but the interesting thing is that at the university, my dissertation, my research was about the implications in Eastern and Western European joint ventures. So I didn't understand how come that was the exact topic of my dissertation. The department where I studied is #1 in the world in its category. I had years of experience. How come I couldn't put that theory into practice? I didn't understand. It didn't make sense. It didn't feel good, and it wasn't pretty at all. We had to get out of the business. We sold the shares. It's still online, but we are not involved anymore. So I got certified in lots of different things because I just didn't understand what happened. And my assumption was that if all of those models are or were correct, there must be a huge overlapping part. And that's what I'm interested in, not the fluff on the top, but the structure beneath the surface. I thought there must be a blueprint of why people think and behave differently. And it turned out that there is. And it turned out that a lot of people have the same problem. And that's how I started ICQ Global, which is now in 45 countries.
That is so fascinating, bro. So, oh man, this is the challenge of me being a podcast host is I get hit with 100 questions at one time. Where do I start? So, Csaba, what did you learn from your experience in working alongside that French CEO? What did you discover? What was the delta between the application of your research and and applying that in that real relationship with that other CEO?
So first of all, when you talk about cultural intelligence, then most people, even just you mentioned culture, then most people think about nationalities. But international knowledge is not cultural intelligence. That's misleading. That's just not true. That has nothing to do with science. Because more than 80% of cultural differences exist within countries, not between them. And one of the poorest container of culture is country of origin, gender, and generation. meaning that based on these categories, you cannot predict an individual's values and beliefs. That has nothing to do with science. Even horoscope is more accurate, and it's not even a joke. Anybody can look it up. But a lot of companies still pretend that international knowledge is cultural intelligence. No. If you need a full checkup at the hospital and you meet the dentist only, that's not a full checkup. It is part of it. It is important, but that's not the same thing. So I had to realize that whatever I learned about French people or French culture, that didn't apply to that person. But that time, I had no idea, first of all. Secondly, somebody told me a story a long time ago. That imagine that you have this emotional intelligence. You're really good at it. You have all the frameworks. And then you deliver a lecture, a speech to someone, like a big audience. Somebody is late, 5 minutes late. They open the door and they look like your ex-partner. Probably that point, all your knowledge is going to disappear. It doesn't matter what you know. So reflecting on that experience now, I think one of the major issues was that probably he reminded me of my father, who I always perceived as really controlling. And I think that was a trigger that I really didn't like. And I didn't even know about that. You know, like Dr. John DeMartini said that often your values come from the perceived void in your past. And because that's the void that you want to fill. So that becomes your highest value. But it's very difficult to reflect on something you're not aware of. If you don't have a word for it, you just feel that it's wrong, it's frustrating, it triggers you, but it's very difficult to deal with it. And you can meditate, you can breathe, but that's not the solution. And now I think that was one of the main reasons.
Fascinating. And it's brilliant. I totally agree. At what point did you become aware that was the issue? Was it in the moment or not until after you were out of the company?
Years after that, years. I think the problem is when you're in the middle of something, then it's very difficult to be objective. And that's why people need coaches, not because they're not smart enough. It's because they need a different perspective.
Excellent. So let me stay on that thread for a second. How important is a self-aware leader?
Very. I mean, that is the foundation. But it's very difficult to be self-aware without going through challenges, without expanding your comfort zone, without failures. And it's not pretty, it's not pleasant, it's not comfortable, but it's meaningful and fulfilling if we learn the lesson. But lots of people don't. You know, like Ray Dalio said that pain plus reflection equals progress. Lots of people have the pain part, but there's no reflection, so there's no progress.
Wow. Okay. So love it. Excellent. What is your process for reflection and or growing your self-awareness?
I try to look at extreme experiences, especially negative ones, negative emotions as anchors, as reminders. That's exactly when you should step back a little bit and reflect, because there is a message there. Even when I do the coaching, when I feel the friction, I said, let's go there. That's where the value is, not when everything is nice. So when people, for example, take an assessment and I do the debrief and I ask them, so did you find any parts where you said, that's definitely not me, and you really disagreed with it? To me, that's where the magic is. Not when, oh yeah, this is great, this is me. So, what now? What should we do? That's great, but let's dig deeper.
Fire. And what's funny is so many people, so many people avoid the pain. And I think that's even a human tendency is to avoid the pain, not run to the pain and like, oh, let me sit in it and reflect in the pain. I know for me, for 4 decades, I was like, I want nothing to do with the pain. Like I just, and then that created a whole series of very unhealthy practices and behaviors and coping mechanisms that were very unhealthy, people pleasing addiction, toxic positivity, emotional neediness, emotional codependency, right? Just a cascade of emotional dysfunction that came.
That's a long list.
Oh, I just gave you the peak, bro. I got a lot more issues that I've had to work through. What have you noticed, Csaba, in the hundreds or thousands of leaders that you have interacted with and worked with and assessed? What are some trends that you have observed in leaders?
If you talk about self-awareness, then I think one of the most important insights is that it's very difficult to be inclusive towards others if you cannot accept yourself. Because if your self-esteem is low, then you have to overcompensate. But if you know exactly who you are and what you stand for, and you are even okay with it, let's push the boundaries, you even like yourself, then you don't have to bully anyone to feel important. Then you don't have to hide to feel safe. Then you can say, you know what, you're right. Then I'm confident enough to say, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. Or I'm sorry, I don't know what that means. Could you please help me? You have to be really confident to do that. Or to ask somebody how they see the situation so we can see the same situation from different perspectives. Then, yes. But that's why, to me, the first one is self-inclusion, which is a concept that, to be honest, I've never seen anywhere else. They talk about inclusion. And if you Google inclusion, what do you find? Lots of rainbow-colored pictures, people hugging, trees, all those things, which is great. But there's a step before that, and that is self-inclusion. And I think that's the real pandemic. When you compare, other people's highlights on social media with how you feel inside, and that's kind of terrifying, and it's not even true. But if you don't have the concept, how can you optimize something if you don't know how it works? Like your mindset, like your emotional makeup. If you don't know that, it's very difficult. You just look around, you try to copy people, you do your best, but maybe that's not enough.
Wow. So that makes me think of, there's a verse in the Bible, love your neighbor as you love yourself. And I've always had a challenge with that, because prior to my emotional growth journey, I've always hated myself. So I'm like, but I've loved other people, but I've hated myself. And I'm like, man, that verse was very hard to wrap my head around. And that is such a fascinating point, that when you can, I don't know if accept yourself is the right way to look at it, but truly understand yourself, then there's no, I love that point, man, that there's no need to feel, well, man, how do I impose myself on Chahbah because I'm feeling insecure? Like, if I feel secure about myself, Chahbah can be who Chahbah is, and I can be who I am, and I can love and accept Chahbah for who Chahbah is. And maybe you love and accept me for who I am, but now, thank God, I'm most of the way through my people-pleasing addiction. I don't want to say I don't care anymore if Chahbah likes me, but it's not as important to me. It's not my identity anymore. So here's a question for you. How do you encourage or recommend leaders to learn to understand and accept themselves as who they are?
The real question is, do they want to be successful? Do they want to be happy? Because the problem is that running away from pain, being driven by fear, still you can achieve a lot, but at what cost? But when you're in this rat race, working hard, making money, you're not going to notice that. You're not going to listen to anybody because, I'm getting the results. But you get used to the pain. Like a trainer told me, and it's a bit kind of disgusting, but he said that the toilet only stinks on the way in, not the way out. Meaning that we get used to everything. So you can get used to the pain as well. You can get addicted to stress. And you think that, just one more year, just one more promotion, just one more car, until you collapse dead. But you're not going to listen to anyone. And that's very difficult to find that point where it hurts enough, but it's not too late.
The way that sometimes I will talk about it is like, I feel like sometimes we can be like functional alcoholics. Like, I've become functionally, emotionally dysfunctional. And I don't see it because it's been my, all of my series of coping mechanisms and survival mechanisms. I've had them for so long, they're normal to me.
Yeah.
In fact, there's a family that we are friends with, and in their family, they yell a lot of very emotional extremes. And that's an instant trigger and turnoff for me, because that is the family that I grew up in. And in my family, we are super chill. There's no spikes in like, we don't yell at each other. There's none of that. And And if I brought it up, or, you know, and I have brought it up, when I first brought it up to the guy, he was like, dude, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't think you're right. And we were with some other friends, and all of them were like, no, Noble's right, bro. That's something. But anyway, to your point, like, it's our dysfunction can become very normal. So because one of the tools that you referenced earlier about helping leaders become more self-aware, two things you've mentioned so far. One is coaching. The other one is reflecting. The reflecting only works if, like, for me, if you had told me to reflect even just 5 years ago, I'd have been like, no, like, I wouldn't have been able to tell you why I didn't want to reflect, but in all reality, I was terrified to reflect. I never liked silence because I was so scared of what I may find in my thoughts. So how would you help somebody like me who was even scared to do any reflection? What are some steps that you could help leaders take to be better and more effective at reflecting?
So on a personal level, first you have to understand what somebody is running away from. So we need leverage. The leverage can be the compelling vision or the pain that you are running away from. Until that's clear, it's very difficult to influence someone. Because, for example, 10 years ago, I didn't listen to anyone. You're working too hard. Why do you have 3 jobs? I said, why are you talking to me? You're lazy. That was my reaction. I didn't listen to anyone until something happened, and okay, let's pay attention now. And that's what I would focus on. So what do you want to achieve? Are you successful because of your behavior now or despite that? It's not the same thing.
Right.
So that's what we have to focus on. And at the same time, when we talk about leadership, there's a lot of investment in teaching them inclusive behaviors and all those things, but nobody's measuring the impact on the people who matter the most, which is their team. So that's why we focus on measuring psychological safety and motivational drivers within the team. And so we can create meaningful conversations driven by data and rooted in science. So even if we just coach the leader, then we can ask the team to complete the assessment. It's anonymous. But we use the data. Look, your intention might be good. You are using your common sense. But look, this is the impact on the people. Their perception is their reality. Do you want to be more successful? Then let's talk about that.
How does a leader create psychological safety?
By not ruining it. And that would be the first principle. You know, just like in it, by not ruining it. Because if you think about it, often psychological safety is not created by doing anything extra, but it's not doing anything stupid that can be seen as a threat to psychological safety. And that is subjective. Because maybe the environment is really psychologically safe, but if you have a corporate PTSD from the previous job, then your perception is that you're not safe because you don't believe it. Outcome is the same. So we focus on both of the sides, the external, but also the internal one. So you can decide to unhide yourself because you realize that, you know what, it makes sense. I can do it. But first, maybe we have to deal with your experience, and you have to reframe that experience.
And what have you seen in terms of the impact and effect of leaders who don't create psychological safety? What is the impact and effect on their team for not having a psychologically safe environment to work in?
Well, usually there are 2 options. So, you know, you can put everything in a 4-quadrant model. And one of the worst part is the anxiety. When there's a lot of motivation, external or internal, but no psychological safety. So even that company or team can make a lot of money, but people are leaving. They are burning out. They're not trusting anyone. And sometimes they are actively damaging your company from inside, and you don't even realize that. And sometimes the silence is the worst one. Or they are in the apathy zone, which means there's no motivation, there's no psychological safety, nothing happens there. And it's proven beyond doubt. You score low on these 2 dimensions, and you're not going to be in business for too long. So it's not optional. But the problem is that often people have outdated or incomplete ideas, or they have this weird stereotype, and they think that psychological safety equals physical comfort. Now, the problem is that if you have the wrong definition, it creates the wrong expectations. Because next time when you don't feel comfortable, then you think that you're not safe. And that's not the same thing. Because, for example, when you do jujitsu, that's not comfortable at all, but it is safe. Because growth requires the right amount of friction within and between people. It's almost like, if you look at a tire, if it's too slippery, there's no friction, it's not going anywhere. Too much friction, then it's stuck. You need the right amount. But that's why if you're a leader, you have to create that environment. You have to understand the individuals. You have to put the right amount of pressure on them. But you also have to provide the right amount of support. And when you match that, that's when you're in the flow.
You are dropping bombs, bro. Oh, this is so awesome. What have been some interesting or fascinating data points that you have collected about leadership and teams and people?
So our assessment is quite different because we also measure how polarized the team is. Now, the problem is that if you look at numbers and averages, often they lie or they hide the truth. So maybe if I look at the average of psychological safety within the team, they would be in the growth zone. We could tick it, pat themselves on the back, fantastic. But if we look at the tension score, we can see the range. That maybe some people feel really safe, they are really blissful, and others are terrified, they feel rejected. So we can break down those ideas into the subcategories, and then we can discuss them. So, okay, so what do you think the problem is? We create those meaningful conversations because everybody can take an assessment, but data on its own means nothing. But stories without data are just entertaining or annoying sometimes. But when you combine data and stories, that's brilliant. That's when you make progress. And this is what we want to create.
What would you say is the biggest area that you help organizations and leaders with?
One of the most typical feedbacks that we get is that finally, and we can talk about it, because before they felt that something was wrong, but they didn't know what. I mean, I can ask you to reflect on how to say good night in Chinese. How much can you reflect on it if you don't speak Chinese? It doesn't matter. You don't know. So we have to go deeper. So we provide clients with a framework, a frame of reference, and a vocabulary to talk about these things. So we facilitate that conversation. We measure the progress because plateau is a myth. You're growing or you're declining. You just don't see that. I mean, nobody wakes up in the morning thinking that, whoa, suddenly I'm morbidly obese. No, because today you look like yesterday. But if I look at my pictures a year ago, I was in better shape. But I didn't see that. So it's really easy to do something. It's really easy not to do it. And you think, oh, it's fine. It all adds up like the compound effect.
Have there been examples of leaders or companies that you have been unable to help? And if so, why?
Let's be honest, clarity and data can be terrifying. But if you get offended by data, that's not a good sign. I can step on the scale and the number is too high. I can hate the scale or I can go on a diet. So, it depends on your level of maturity, your emotional intelligence. And not everybody likes that. And sometimes they're terrified. What if you notice something? But I said, you can close your eyes and you can just crash into the wall. Is it good? So not everybody is the ideal client because maybe they're not ready for it. And sometimes you have to let people get hurt a little bit because that's how we learn. So what I try to do is, that's why I do the webinar every single month, to build awareness about this so people can ask better questions, so they can get better answers. Because most of the time, they don't even know about this. And if you look at, for example, like the diversity and inclusion field, sometimes it is so political that you have no idea what you can say, what you shouldn't say. And then why would you invest in something if you have to be scared that they will shame you? So that's not very motivating. So I don't want to do that. I want to create conversations. But they have to understand what is the benefit of doing it and what is the cost of not doing it. And at the same time, often the problem is not that those people are evil, but they're just not aware of this topic. They cannot ask for something they don't know about. They're aware of the symptoms of the problems, not the root cause. But if we want to help them, we have to meet them at their level. We have to talk about the symptoms, and then we can go deeper, not the other way around.
What have you found is one of the biggest challenges for leaders or companies that you work with?
I think there are a lot of articles about diversity and inclusion, and just delivering the message that it's good for the business, but it's not. At least not on its own. That's just not true. Diversity means that you have a lot of people, first of all, who look different, because most companies focus on the visible layer of diversity, the identity differences, which is really important from an ethical perspective, from equity and equality perspective. Yes, because often how you look is the first obstacle, the first hurdle. But the teams don't break down because you have a beard. That's not the point. But when we drive each other crazy, when I drain myself, when people react differently to what you expect. So we focus on cognitive diversity, the invisible layer, the only layer of diversity that has proven benefit in terms of performance. But that's also the difficult one. When two people disagree, what happens after that? That's the defining moment between diversity and inclusion. Diversity is just the pure existence of differences. Inclusion is when you make it work. But that's something that we need to learn. That's not automatic. Inclusion is not a natural consequence of diversity. But maybe that's what you read about. I just need a full selection of all these culture groups. And you don't get the results. And then what is the natural consequence or the conclusion? It's fake news. Doesn't work. Let's go back to my people. Because if you look at team dynamics, one of the most powerful forces is homophilic diversity. And I know it sounds like a disease, but it just means that we like and trust people who are similar to us. Now, the problem is that if the starting point is not correct, it's very difficult to plan the journey accurately. So we can pretend that I love diversity. No, you don't. Your brain doesn't. Because diversity means unpredictability. That is the last thing that your brain wants, especially cognitive diversity. When people disagree with you, when they have a different pace, different opinions, well, that's horrible. We don't like that. So it's difficult to deal with that. But if I know that, I also know what the solution is. The more you get to know yourself, the more you understand yourself, the more you get to know other people who think and behave differently, the more predictable they become, the more familiar they become. Now we can create synergy, not before that. So that's why we have to focus on that. But cognitive diversity is difficult.
And your brain is about 10x bigger than my brain. So just bear with me if this is
just
not
the size of my head, not the brain.
So how your message there just hit me is, and again, tell me if I'm off here. It sounds like a key in let me just say differences, whether you go full diversity, equity, and inclusion, or I'm an older guy and I'm Gen X and there's a Gen Z, which that's a real dynamic also, is seeking to understand, right? If I make it as a leader, my goal to truly understand Chahbah and your story and your journey and your experiences through being inquisitive, asking questions, being curious, not judgmental, that goes a long way. Am I understanding you right or no?
I think it could work in a fairy tale because most people are not curious about others. Most people are not curious why somebody is right. They just want to prove why they are right. And that's why I said when there's a disagreement. So let's say that you and me disagree and you know that you are right. Then what's the default option? I am wrong. If there's no trust between us, there's no psychological safety, you're not aware of this topic, then you have to put all that effort into convincing me that you win, I lose. You're smart, I'm not. That's not really ideal. But if you're aware of this topic, then you know that cultural differences are clashes of common senses. So life makes sense from my perspective. At least I do believe that I'm right. So why don't you ask me, what do you know that I don't? What can you see that I cannot? And if we can do this on both sides, and we can see the same situation from different perspectives, we can make a better decision. Not until then. But how many people do that? Not a lot. It's tiring. This is the first part. We have to understand that the brain was designed to keep you in your comfort zone. It's kind of forcing you to hang out with people like you because it's more comfortable. You can save energy. It's not designed for disagreements. So yes, you can go against it, but for how long? If this is what you have to do every single day, you would burn out. It's difficult. But if I can reframe this, and if I realize that this kind of frustration is the wrapping paper on the gift of learning, then I can reframe the experience. So even though it's uncomfortable, it's positive, because otherwise my brain would reject it. But again, if I don't know how the brain works, how could I optimize that? Naturally, I just reject it. And that's where we start. Now, on top of this, you put political correctness. So from the distance, it looks like everybody's polite, but that's not true. It just means that is pretty much the other side of racism. It technically prevents people from talking about something. Because if I cannot ask you a question, what's the alternative? I assume something. And assumptions tend to be negative. From an evolutionary perspective, the safest option is to assume the worst. That's why gossips tend to be negative, not positive. Because we had to survive, and we can survive by avoiding pain. That's natural. So at the end of the day, we are just widening the gap. So on the surface, there's no problem. But in a company, if you have no conflict, usually that means that there's no psychological safety at all, because often political correctness is the sign of lack of psychological safety, or people are way too similar. And we have plenty of case studies to see this. A bunch of different looking people who think the same way. Of course, it's easy to get along.
Right. Oh, man, I've got so many examples of that. I mean, my experience in the military, I was just telling a buddy of mine who's in special operations, when I was in a particular military unit that was, we call it conventional or big army unit, called the 82nd Airborne Division. And it was masterful, their programming on all of us. And we all wore a maroon red beret. And just one little teeny example, anyone who did not wear a red beret, anyone who wore a regular, we call it a patrol cap, or anyone that wore a black beret, anyone that had long hair, anyone that was overweight, man, we would vilify those people because they did not qualify or fit in our tribe. And it was, and I drank, I not only drank the Kool-Aid, man, I was putting the Kool-Aid out. It was amazing. And then I was in a business cult for 20 plus years. Same deal, the power of programming, man. And it's because again, I had no emotional intelligence. I had no self-awareness. I had, very little social awareness. It was, so it's so and then look at nowadays. Let's look at you vax or you didn't vax. You mask or you don't mask. You believe in DEI or you don't believe in DEI, right? Like all these ways that the brain, and we just go along with it, right? Whatever your media, I like this media or that media. And anyone who doesn't like that media, all of a sudden, Csaba is definitely wrong because he's Hungarian or right, whatever our little stories are. Yeah, man, that is so fast. How do you help people grow beyond that tribal mentality to start to look outside of their comfort zone? How do you get people out of those psychological ruts?
First, we just have to understand that this is normal. Even then, it's natural. So I think this binary thinking is the root of all evil. Like you said, that you're with me or you're against me. So for example, in our assessments, we always use a sliding scale because life is not black and white, not at all. But it is true that the bigger the mindset gap between you and me, the more we are going to trigger each other. But that's exactly where the potential lies, for success or disaster. But at the same time, we just have to understand the root cause of this issue. And that is that the world is so uncertain that it's unbearable. So where do you get your safety from, your certainty from? And if you make the world, black and white, then it gives you the illusion that I am in control. Those people are with me, those ones are against me. But I don't know, what about these people in the middle? That's just confusing. That's even more uncertainty. So, like, I can't remember who said it, some famous author, that it's much easier to fool people than make them realize that they got fooled. And that's part of it. So once people have self-inclusion and the confidence is coming from inside, then I think life is easier because it's much more stable. But if my self-esteem depends on how many people like me, how many people agree with me, that's a really fragile place. And also, if your identity is tied to one major culture group, let it be a political party, a way of eating, if somebody attacks that culture group, that feels like an attack on your identity. So you go for blood. You have to win. It's not optional. And in survival mode, we are not inclusive. We are not cute. We have to be strong and quick. That's human nature. But if I know who I am, and that culture group is just a tiny piece of this puzzle, then it's much safer. And I think some people, you ask them, do you know who you are without your job and maybe your nationality? And then, what do you mean? Well, think about that. Because that question never came up. So I think once we have this core issue that, give them certainty, but that certainty should come from inside, that's real confidence. Real confidence is not when you know all the answers, but when you know that whatever happens, you can find the solution, you can deal with it. That's the real confidence.
How do you help someone develop real confidence?
It goes back to the leverage. That what do you want to achieve in terms of, do you need freedom to do something or not to do something? I think there's a difference between the two as well. And I think as coaches, our job is to bring a memory back from the future. So just to show people that, listen, if you carry on like this, this is where it leads to. And then you just amplify that pain. And then you bring it back. And that level of pain compared to the discomfort of change is nothing. So you go with it. But you need that leverage because often we have no idea where it leads to. And that's what we have to do. Bring it back. And then, there was this really interesting program. I think they used AI when you could predict how you would look like in 20 years if you carry on with this lifestyle. So let's say you drink and you smoke, and then you got your picture. That's you in 20 years' time. And that made it so realistic to people because it's so easy to just dismiss my future self. But when they could hold that in their hand, they said, wow, this is where it leads to. I'm having fun now, but this is me in 20 years' time. Now you take it seriously. But that's not something that we think about on a daily basis.
Csaba, this is fire, bro. Okay, so wrapping up here, I could talk to you for hours. What resources do you have? How do we follow you? What's your website?
So the website is icq.global. And then the best option is to connect on LinkedIn, attend the webinars, because usually we have a 45 minutes presentation and a Q&A, always live. That's when we have a lot of discussions. We have certification programs for coaches and consultants who want to provide the latest up-to-date solutions to the clients. The Uncommon Sense in Unusual Books, it's a hybrid book, which means that if you get the book, there is a message in it somewhere in the very beginning that if you send me an email to a specific email address, then you get access to a learning platform. So you read a chapter and then you can also experience it.
Brilliant. And I'll include all the links and stuff in the show notes for those y'all that are either watching on YouTube or listening on the podcast. Any final thoughts or advice or suggestions, Csaba?
To me, one of the the most important lessons I learned was that the quality of our life depends on the quality of the questions we ask. And if I go back to that example that two people disagree, instead of asking who is right or wrong, ask a different question. Is there an even better way of doing things? Because if that's the question, nobody can lose. And this is what I mean by that. But it took a lot of time to learn this lesson because I had to prove it all the time. And that wasn't the best option.
Chahbah, man, thanks a million. Okay, I've never asked this question before, but I'm going to. Let's see how this goes. What is one of your takeaways from our conversation?
Based on what you said about your background and experience and what we discussed, is that there is no growth without challenges. And a lot of people are trying to avoid adversity instead of reframing it and realizing that they are all stepping stones. They are almost like a boot camp for us. Because, like in in Zen Buddhism, there's this Kensho and Satori, that how we can learn. Do you grow through insights because you are looking for it and you study and then you want that experience, or life slaps you in the face and then there's a lot of pain? It's coming. Now the question is, are you ready for it? So personally, I would rather walk every day a little bit so I don't have to run tomorrow. Even then, probably we have to run one day, but at least we are more prepared. So it is a choice. But the more you know, the better decision you can make. But at the same time, a lot of people get into this intellectual hamster mode. Have you ever seen a hamster eating? When they shove everything in the face and they look like this, but they don't swallow? A lot of people are like that. They take another course, they read another book, because you cannot fail at gathering information. But when you have to apply that principle, then it's pretty much guaranteed that it's going to hurt, or at least it's going to be uncomfortable. So, you know what? Not yet. After the next course. And they turn into intellectual hamsters. And I was one of those.
Oh, this has been so good, man. This is so good. Thank you, Chahbah. Totally appreciate your time and your wisdom and your insights. I am so stoked to go back through and capture all the notes from our conversation, brother. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.